Back home, and some health experts believe the COVID-19 second wave might not happen this year, but they advise the focus should be on decisive behavioral change to avoid a super spreader events. Let's speak to virologist Dr. Marvin Hsiao from the University of Cape Town. Doc, thanks for your time. We appreciate it. So the second wave next year, some say. What do you think?
So I would like to say that we don't really have a reliable tool currently to predict whether and when the second wave is likely to occur. But it's important to consider the context of which these are questions being asked, because a lot of people who ask me these questions would like to know, whether these non-pharmacological interventions like a mask, social distancing, avoid indoor spaces, etc., can be relaxed or ignored. And I think if one look at that example of the Northern Hemisphere, particularly European and the UK countries, this is exactly what happened and had led to the second wave. So whether or not in the short term we are likely to have the second wave, we still have to keep at it, with these pharmacological interventions, because it's the only thing that we have. Now, talking about the actual likelihood of the second wave, I guess it's how we define this second wave. And there are various different models trying to predict exactly what's going on, and that's not particularly my field. But from a virologist's point of view, given our knowledge of other acute respiratory tract infections, and we now know that a fairly large proportion of population had been infected in the recent past, it does appear that a large-scale reinfection or second wave in the short term is reasonably unlikely.
Yeah. So what about a vaccine before next year? I see some people saying we'll get a second wave next year sometime. We heard the WHO saying just recently that they're hoping to have some vaccine by the end of the year. Whether it'll be rolled out on a mass scale is the problem. What are you hearing about possible vaccines?
I guess same as everyone else. We heard some messages of hope, but we have no clarity on, whether particularly the ordinary citizens of South Africa are able to access these vaccines. And, as you rightly mentioned, whether the efficacy of vaccine has been trialed in clinical study is good or not, to me, access to the vaccine is particularly for a large proportion of our population, it will remain quite limited even in next year. So I suspect that in the short term, we have no choice but to continue with all these other non-pharmacological interventions that we've been doing so far.
So our health minister is concerned with the 9% increase in infections since the easing of restrictions. Do you think stricter measures should actually be brought back to avoid a second wave that has numbers that are uncontrollable?
I think I would try to hope for better adherence of what we are currently having. So I think everything, I guess, is in the details, and it depends on what is meant by stricter measures. I do foresee that, the stricter measure of lockdown, I think over the prolonged period had not proven to be too effective in stopping the infection. So I think it's unlikely we'll go back to the earlier very strict lockdown. However, these things are very difficult to say, as some of the European countries are not going back to exactly that. So, I do think that from me personally, I don't think going back to stricter lockdown is the way to go. But I think it's up to every citizen to actually practice the rules that we actually have currently better, so that we can avoid that exact lockdown.
All right. Thank you so much for your time and your insight. Appreciate it. Dr. Marvin Hsiao, a virologist from the University of Cape Town.